The Library Among the Pines, Chapter 1. The path between the trees. Some places are never meant to be found in a hurry. The old library of Embervik stood well away from the harbour, hidden among tall pine trees where the forest grew quiet and the sunlight arrived gently through the branches. There were no signs pointing the way. No maps mentioned it. Yet everyone in the village seemed to know exactly where it was. A narrow footpath began behind the church, winding softly between moss-covered stones and towering pines whose branches whispered together even on the calmest mornings. Children were often told that the path would only reveal itself to those who truly wished to read, not simply those looking for a building filled with books. Whether that was true, no one could say. On cool mornings, the forest carried the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and old timber warmed by yesterday's sun. Small rays of light slipped between the trees, painting golden patterns across the path before quietly disappearing again. The lantern keeper walked this trail every Thursday, always at the same slow pace, always carrying the same small leather satchel beneath his arm. No one had ever seen what he borrowed. No one had ever seen what he returned. Yet every Thursday, before the village had fully awakened, he disappeared into the forest and came back with a peaceful smile that lingered for the rest of the day. Some believed he read old sea journals. Others whispered that the library held books no one else could understand. The oldest villagers simply smiled whenever anyone asked. "The books choose their readers," they would say. At the very end of the forest path, where the pine trees opened just enough to welcome the morning light, stood a small stone building wrapped in ivy. Its windows glowed warmly, even before sunrise. Above the heavy wooden door hung a simple carved sign: "The Library of Embervik." And every Thursday morning, before the first fishing boat touched the water, the old librarian was already waiting inside. Chapter 2. The Keeper of Forgotten Stories. The library was warmer than the morning outside. The scent of old paper, polished wood, and burning birch logs welcomed every visitor long before a single word was spoken. Rows of dark oak bookshelves stretched quietly through the small stone building, each one filled with books whose worn leather bindings carried no titles upon their spines. It had always been that way. Visitors never chose a book by its name, only by instinct. The elderly librarian stood beside a small wooden desk near the entrance. Her silver hair was neatly tied behind her head, and a pair of tiny round spectacles rested low upon her nose. She smiled before speaking. "Good morning, Elias." The lantern keeper nodded warmly. "Good morning, Ingrid." Their greetings never changed. For nearly 40 years, every Thursday had begun exactly the same way. No one remembered when the tradition had started. Neither of them seemed interested in counting anymore. Ingrid reached beneath the counter and carefully placed a steaming cup of tea beside him. "You'll need this today." Elias looked at the cup with quiet amusement. "You already know?" She smiled. "The library usually does." He chuckled softly. "I sometimes wonder whether you're talking about the building or the books." Ingrid looked slowly around the silent room. Then she whispered, "I'm no longer certain there's a difference." Silence settled gently between them. Not an awkward silence, a comfortable one. Outside, the wind stirred softly through the pine trees. Somewhere above the roof, a raven called once before disappearing deeper into the forest. Ingrid finally reached toward one of the oldest shelves in the room. Unlike the others, this shelf held only 7 books, each bound in faded blue leather, each untouched by dust. She rested her fingers upon the 4th volume, then paused. "No," she murmured almost to herself. "Not yet." Instead, she selected another, a small brown book no thicker than a man's hand. Its cover bore no title, only the faint outline of a carved boat. She placed it gently before Elias, without opening it. "I believe," she said softly, "someone has been waiting for this story to return." Elias looked down at the worn cover. His eyes lingered upon the little carved boat. And for reasons he could not explain, it felt strangely familiar. Chapter 3. The First Page. Elias accepted the small brown book with both hands. Its leather cover felt unusually warm, as though it had been resting beside a fire only moments before. He traced his fingers gently across the tiny carving of the boat. The wood had been polished smooth by countless hands before his own, or perhaps by time itself. He looked toward Ingrid. "Who wrote this one?" The librarian smiled in the familiar way she always did whenever someone asked a question whose answer could never be simple. "No one remembers. And yet," she added, "everyone who reads it remembers something." Elias tilted his head slightly. "Something from the story?" Ingrid slowly shook hers. "No, something from themselves." Silence settled once more between the bookshelves. The old clock above the fireplace ticked patiently. Outside, a gentle breeze brushed against the windows, carrying the quiet scent of pine into the room each time the chimney sighed. Elias carried the book toward his favorite chair. It stood beside a tall window overlooking the forest, where morning light filtered softly through the branches. The chair had become his over many years, not because anyone had claimed it, but because everyone else somehow knew it already belonged to him. He sat carefully. The leather creaked softly beneath his weight. For a long moment, he simply held the book. Some stories, he believed, should never be opened too quickly. Finally, he lifted the cover. The first page was almost empty. Only a single sentence had been written in elegant handwriting. "Every story returns to the one who is ready to hear it." Nothing more. No title, no chapter, only those quiet words. Elias read them again, then once more. They felt strangely familiar, as though he had once known them, many years ago. A faint smile appeared across his face. He turned the page and stopped. Every remaining page was blank. He looked back toward Ingrid. "I don't understand." The old librarian did not seem surprised. She continued arranging books upon a nearby shelf before answering. "You will." "When?" She looked toward the window where the morning mist drifted gently between the pines. "When the story decides it is time to begin." Elias glanced once more at the empty pages. For the briefest moment, he could have sworn he heard distant waves. Not outside, not beneath Lantern Pier, but somewhere inside the silence of the book itself. Chapter 4. The Words That Appeared. Elias closed the book once more. For several quiet minutes, neither he nor Ingrid spoke. The library had never been a place where silence felt empty. Here, silence was simply another way of listening. The fire crackled gently inside the old stone fireplace. Somewhere among the shelves, the wooden floor settled with a soft creak that sounded almost like an old friend shifting comfortably in a chair. Elias rested the book upon his lap. The pages were still blank, every single one. He smiled quietly to himself. I suppose this means I should be patient. Ingrid looked up from a stack of returned books. I've never known a worthwhile story to enjoy being hurried. He nodded. I should have guessed. Outside, sunlight slowly climbed higher through the pines. Golden beams drifted across the library floor, touching one bookshelf after another, as though the forest itself wished to read. Elias found himself watching tiny dust particles floating peacefully through the light. There was something comforting about places that had existed long before you arrived, and would continue long after you had gone. Without thinking, he gently opened the book again. The first page remained exactly as before. Every story returns to the one who is ready to hear it. He turned the page. Blank, another, blank, another. He paused. A single line, written in fresh dark ink, had appeared near the bottom of the page. It had not been there moments earlier. Elias leaned forward. Slowly, he read the words aloud. The sea remembers what people forget. Nothing else, just that one sentence. His fingers remained perfectly still upon the page. He was certain, absolutely certain. The words had not been there before. He looked immediately toward Ingrid. She wasn't surprised. She simply smiled. The story has noticed you. Elias looked back down at the page. The story? The books don't belong to us. Ingrid's voice was barely louder than the turning of a page. We belong to them, for a little while. A long silence followed. Outside, the wind moved softly through the tops of the pine trees. Far away, almost too distant to hear, came the lonely sound of a ship's bell drifting across the fjord. Elias closed the book with great care. Somehow, the library felt even older than it had an hour before. Not because the building had changed, but because he had. Chapter 5. The story that chose its reader. Elias remained seated long after the words had appeared. The little brown book rested quietly in his hands. He no longer expected it to behave like any ordinary book. Perhaps it never had. The fire burned softly nearby, filling the library with the comforting scent of birch and old stone. Outside, morning had fully arrived. Sunlight spilled gently through the tall windows, casting warm patterns across shelves that had watched generations come and go. Ingrid returned carrying another cup of tea. Without asking, she placed it beside him. You'll be here a while. Elias smiled. I think you're right. She sat opposite him for the first time that morning. The chair creaked softly beneath her. For several quiet moments, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The library had always been patient. Finally, Elias looked toward her. Has every book here? He paused, searching for the right words. Chosen someone. Ingrid wrapped both hands around her teacup. Everyone. And every reader. She nodded. Only once. Elias frowned gently. Only once? The first story is the most important. She looked around the room as if greeting old friends hidden among the shelves. It doesn't matter how many books a person reads afterward. The first one always finds the place in the heart that has been waiting the longest. Elias lowered his eyes toward its small brown book. The carved boat seemed different now, not because it had changed, because he had begun to notice it. The sea remembers what people forget, he whispered. Ingrid smiled. Yes, but what does it mean? The old librarian looked toward the rain-speckled window. Far beyond the forest, beyond Lantern Pier, Beyond the quiet village itself lay the open sea. It means memories never truly disappear. They simply wait until someone is ready to carry them home. Those words settled gently inside the room, like dust floating through morning light. Elias rested one hand upon the book. He suddenly remembered something. Not clearly, only a feeling. The smell of salt air, the sound of wooden oars cutting calm water, a child's laughter carried by the wind, gone again before he could grasp it. He looked up. Was that? Ingrid gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. She smiled warmly. The story has only just opened its first page. Outside, the church bell rang once across the valley. The sound drifted through the open window. The lantern keeper closed his eyes. For the first time in many years, he felt as though someone or something had quietly remembered him. Chapter 6. The Book That Remembered. The church bell faded into silence. For a long while, neither Elias nor Ingrid moved. The little brown book rested quietly between them. Its pages no longer seemed empty. They seemed patient. Elias opened it once again. This time, he did not expect answers. He simply listened. As the pages turned beneath his fingertips, new lines appeared one after another, as though an invisible hand were writing only moments before he arrived. The ink flowed slowly across the paper, not hurried, not delayed, exactly when it was needed. He began to read. There was once a little boy who believed every boat had a name. Elias smiled faintly. He remembered thinking that as a child. He had completely forgotten. His grandfather never corrected him. Instead, he told the boy that boats remember kindness long after people forget it. A warmth spread quietly through Elias's chest. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice, soft, patient, carried by the sound of gentle waves against old timber. The library disappeared around him, not completely, only enough for memory to find its way home. He saw small hands gripping worn wooden oars, a faded blue rowing boat rocking gently beside Lantern Pier, a much younger version of himself, laughing as his grandfather steadied the boat before pushing away from the dock. The morning had looked almost exactly like today. The same mist, the same quiet water, the same mountains watching over Embervik. His eyes grew moist, not from sadness, from recognition. So, he whispered, it wasn't the story I had forgotten. Ingrid looked at him kindly. No, you had only forgotten where it lived. Elias closed the book gently. For the first time in many years, the memory no longer felt distant. It felt returned. Outside the library window, the pine trees swayed softly. Far beyond the forest, sunlight sparkled across the fjord. And somewhere, down at Lantern Pier, a faded blue rowing boat rocked gently against the weathered wood, waiting exactly where it had always belonged. Chapter 7. The Walk Home. Elias thanked Ingrid as he always had, with a quiet smile, a gentle nod, and a promise that needed no words. The little brown book remained upon the librarian's desk. He had not taken it with him. Some books, he now understood, were never meant to leave the library. They simply needed someone willing to remember them. Ingrid walked with him to the heavy oak door. Before he stepped outside, she rested one hand softly against the worn wooden frame. The path home feels different today. Elias smiled. It already does. She nodded knowingly. The forest has a way of noticing these things. The door closed gently behind him. The The familiar path stretched quietly beneath the towering pines. Morning had fully awakened now. Golden sunlight danced across the moss-covered stones. Tiny birds hopped from branch to branch high above, their songs blending softly with the distant whisper of the wind. For the first time in many years, Elias did not hurry back to the village. He walked slowly, not because he wished the journey to last, but because he had finally learned to notice it. The scent of pine lingered in the cool air. The old wooden bench waited faithfully beside the trail. He stopped there once more, only this time. He did not close his eyes. Instead, he simply looked at the forest, at the sunlight, at the quiet beauty that had always been there. How many mornings had he walked this path without truly seeing it? He smiled to himself. Perhaps that was what the library had returned to him. Not only memory, but attention. Life had always been filled with quiet miracles. They simply asked to be noticed. As the trees slowly opened, Embervik appeared below. Smoke curled gently from stone chimneys. The church bell rested silently after greeting the morning. Far beyond the rooftops, Lantern Pier reached patiently into the calm fjord. The faded blue rowing boat still rested beside the weathered timbers, rocking ever so slightly upon the water, exactly where it belonged. Elias stood there for a long moment. The sea shimmered beneath the gentle morning light. He placed one hand over his heart, not because something had changed, but because something had returned. Then, with the same quiet smile the villagers had noticed every Thursday for so many years, the lantern keeper began walking home. And from that morning onward, those who happened to pass him in the village would sometimes notice something different. Whenever a child asked him a question, he no longer answered immediately. Instead, he would smile, look toward the forest, and gently ask, "Have you ever visited the library among the pines?" Most children would shake their heads. Some would ask where it was. Elias always gave the very same answer. "You won't find it by searching. You'll find it when you're ready." And somewhere, hidden quietly beneath the whispering branches, the old library waited. Its shelves remained full. Its fire burned warmly. Its stories rested patiently, waiting for the next reader. And so, another quiet evening settles over Embervik. The lantern still burns at Lantern Pier. The forest still whispers among the pines. And somewhere, another story is already waiting to be found. Thank you for spending this peaceful evening with us. If this story brought you a little comfort or helped you drift a little closer to sleep, we hope you'll return to Embervik again soon. Until next time, rest well, sleep peacefully, and remember, the quietest stories often stay with us the longest. Good night.